If you grew up in the 1970s in Britain, you never had to ask what car your family had. It was parked outside, it was probably brown, and on cold mornings it needed a good talking to. Everyone will tell you those cars vanished because they were rubbish. Everyone is wrong. Britain built more than 1 million Morris Marinas. 31 are still on the road. Not 31,000, 31. In the year 2000, it was 95. So they aren't gone. They're going right now while we're talking. And here's what breaks the theory. The Triumph Dolomite, a car Britain built nearly 6 times fewer of, has 16 times more survivors left today. Same rust, same factories, same decade. Opposite fate, and it has nothing to do with which was the better car. Stay with me and you'll know exactly why the car your dad owned was worth far more than anybody ever gave it credit for. 10 cars every British family owned in the 1970s, in the order they arrived on Britain's driveways. Let's get stuck in. We start with the car Britain was already driving when the decade began. You knew it as the 1100, or the 1300, or possibly as an MG, a Riley, a Wolseley, or a Vanden Plas, because British Leyland sold the same car 6 different ways and hoped nobody would notice. Same body, same clever Issigonis front-wheel drive layout, 6 different rosettes on the nose, and it worked. 2.1 million were built between 1962 and 1974. It was Britain's best-selling car in every year, but one between 1964 and 1971. In 1970 alone, industry registration figures show 132,965 of them found new owners. It rode on hydroelastic suspension, fluid-filled units linked front to rear, which meant a small family saloon rode better than cars costing twice as much. Then the rust came for the subframes, and British Leyland replaced it with the Allegro. And here's the detail that tells you everything about what went wrong. In 1973, this car was 11 years old. The Morris versions had already been discontinued, and it still sold 59,198, a figure its brand new replacement would barely beat in any single year of its entire life. The old car was outselling its own future. Now, here's one your dad probably learned to drive in. The Escort arrived in 1968 with a grille shaped like a dog bone, rear-wheel drive, and roughly the mechanical complexity of a hammer. That was the point. It was cheap, it was light, and anybody with a spanner and a Saturday could keep it going. In 1970, it put 95,782 cars on British roads. Across the decade, well over 1 million. And because it was simple and light, Ford went rallying with it. The Escort Mexico, the RS 1600, and turned a shopping car into a giant killer. So why don't you see them? Because ordinary Escorts were driven into the ground, and then they rusted, and then they were worth nothing. The ones that survived are almost all the sporty versions, the ones somebody thought were special. But the Escort has the last laugh. In 1982, it took the #1 spot in Britain, the only car on this list that ended the story on top. Now, here's the cleverest car in this video, and almost nobody wanted it. The Maxi arrived in 1969 as the first British production car with a 5-speed gearbox, and British Motor Corporation's first purpose-built hatchback. 5 doors, folding seats, a bed if you wanted one. It was a decade ahead of the market. It was also built around somebody else's doors. Boss George Harriman decided the new car had to reuse the door pressings from the Austin 1800 to avoid the cost of new tooling, which meant the wheelbase was locked near that of the unpopular 1800, and the entire middle of the car looked identical to it. Ex-Ford designer Roy Haynes was eventually brought in to rescue the two ends. Britain's most advanced family car, hobbled by a saving on door panels. It never recovered, Its best year was 1972 at 53,984. Around 486,000 were built. Government registration data shows 203 still licensed today. And this is the one everybody forgets. The Avenger launched in 1970, built at Ryton and later at Linwood in Scotland, and it was Roots, soon Chrysler, having a proper go at Ford. Conventional, rear-wheel drive, sharp little hips, and genuinely decent to drive. It sold. In 1972, it put 78,729 cars on the road, more than the Maxi managed in any year of its life. By the end, 638,631 Avengers had been built. Then, it got passed around like an unwanted heirloom. Roots to Chrysler, Chrysler to Peugeot, the badge changing from Hillman to Chrysler to Talbot, until Linwood closed in 1981 and took Scottish volume car making with it. Around 250 are still licensed. A car that outsold half this list, and you could gather every survivor in Britain into one field. If your family didn't have a Ford, there is a very good chance you had one of these. The Viva was Vauxhall's bread and butter, and by the 70s it was everywhere, over 1.5 million built across all three generations. In 1971, it registered 99,393 cars in a single year. It was so ordinary that Monty Python built a sketch around counting Vivas on the Leicester bypass. Some of them, the joke went, with the optional chrome strip. And then it rusted. Vauxhall's reputation for corrosion in this era was so bad, it became a national punchline. The wings, the sills, the front cross member, all of it dissolving quietly in the British damp. Government registration data shows 432 Vivas of all generations still licensed, from more than 1.5 million. And now we come to the car of the decade. The Mark III Cortina arrived in 1970 with Coke bottle hips borrowed from Detroit, a slab of fake wood across the dashboard, and a badge, L, XL, GT, GXL, that told your neighbors precisely where you sat in the company pecking order. The numbers are extraordinary. 187,159 registered in 1972. 192,184 in 1979. Britain's best-selling car every year from 1972 to 1982. A 10-year reign nothing has matched since. But here's what most people don't know. It should have been 11 or 12 years. Ford was hit by devastating strikes in 1970 and 1971, including a 10-week stoppage at Dagenham between April and June 1971 that cost a reported 100,000 vehicles, close to a quarter of a full year's output. Without those disputes, industry analysis suggests the Cortina would have taken the #1 spot in both of those years too, which is the part of this story people get wrong. The industrial chaos of the 1970s didn't only maul British Leyland, it mauled Ford as well. Ford survived it. British Leyland didn't. And this is where the story turns. British Leyland needed a Cortina rival and needed it immediately. So the Marina arrived in April 1971, and it was built to a deadline and a budget rather than to a standard. The clearest evidence is underneath. The Marina's front suspension, torsion bars and hydraulic lever arm dampers was derived from the Morris Marina, a design from 1948. It was carried over to keep tooling costs down, and it went into a car sold to families driving a motorway network the Marina was never designed for. British Leyland knew. By August 1971, months after launch, they had already revised the front geometry to reduce understeer. By November 1972, they had fitted fatter torsion bars. The nation's #2 car was being fixed while it was still on sale, and Britain bought it anyway. 115,041 in 1973, beating the Escort into third place. Today, government registration data shows 31 Morris Marinas still taxed and on the road, with another 34 declared off-road. 65 cars, from more than 1 million built. You could park every surviving marina in Britain in a single supermarket car park and still have spaces going spare. Now, this one was aspirational. This was the car on the good driveway. The Dolomite arrived in 1972 as a proper compact sports saloon. Wood, cloth, chrome, and from 1973, the Dolomite Sprint, with 127 brake horsepower from one of the world's first mass-produced 16-valve engines. Fitted to a family four-door in Coventry, 204,003 were built. That's roughly a fifth of the Marina's output. And now we come back to the number I gave you at the start. Government registration data shows 1,065 Dolomites still licensed today. 420 of them are Sprints. Britain built nearly 6 times as many Marinas, and there are 16 times more Dolomites left. So here's why. The Dolomite wasn't better made. It rusted just as enthusiastically. It survived because people thought it was worth saving. That's the whole difference. Hold on to that, because it's about to explain everything. And now, the punchline of British motoring. The Allegro replaced the 1100 and 1300 in May 1973, and it was supposed to be enormous. Austin Morris boss George Turnbull predicted it would take up to 10% of all UK car sales, which would have made it effectively the national car. It never finished better than 5th. Autocar tested one in May 1973 and was strikingly generous, calling it a big step forward in all respects, while noting the snatchy, balking gear change and the pitch and dive of the Hydraga suspension. And then, in the most quietly damning line of the whole review, the magazine excused its criticism by suggesting the test car was a very early example to move down the line at Longbridge, which is a very polite way of saying the factory was shipping rough cars and everybody knew it. 642,350 were built over 10 years, less than a third of the car it replaced. Around 288 survive today. We finish with the Wedge. The Princess landed in 1975 looking like nothing else on a British road. Harris Mann's dramatic doorstop, low nose, high tail, enormous inside. It entered the top 10 that year with 29,067 registrations. And it had one fatal flaw, which was that it looked exactly like a hatchback and wasn't one. Mann drew it with a tailgate. It was designed to have a tailgate. British Leyland removed it, reportedly to avoid stealing the thunder of the upcoming Rover SD1, and left the car with fixed rear glass and a conventional boot hidden behind a shape that promised otherwise. Buyers walked up to it, saw a hatchback, tried the tailgate, and found a boot lid. It finally got the hatchback it had been drawn with years later, rebadged as the Austin Ambassador, by which point nobody was listening. Around 225,000 Princesses were built. 65 are still licensed. And an honorable mention because it changed everything. In 1977, for the first time, an obviously foreign car broke into Britain's top 10. The Datsun Sunny. 35,257 registrations. It wasn't beautiful, and it rusted like everything else in Britain. But it started every morning. The heater worked, the radio was included, and the dealer didn't shrug at you. Japanese imports reached 11% of the market. And here's the part people forget. Japanese manufacturers then voluntarily capped their own share at that level. The gentleman's agreement. Not because Britain forced them, but because they feared the unions would push the government into real import controls if they pressed any harder. They were winning so comfortably they had to hold themselves back. So why did they all vanish? Not because Britain stopped buying them. Look at the market share instead. In 1971, British Leyland took 40.2% of every car sold in Britain. By 1979, that was 19.6%. Over the same 8 years, imports went from 14.3% to 56.3%. Ford overtook the so-called national champion as early as 1977. But the deeper reason is simpler and sadder. These cars rusted. Thin steel, no galvanizing, water sitting in box sections all winter. And when a rusty Marina was worth 40 quid, nobody restored it. They restored E-types. Nobody restores the car their dad complained about. There's even a hole in the record where the recession bit hardest. The N registration year, from August 1974 to July 1975, was so depressed that N-plate cars are noticeably rarer on the classic scene today than K, L or M. A whole year of British motoring almost missing. And yet, one car from that decade's top 10 didn't vanish at all. The Mini. Same rust, same factories, same decade. Hundreds of thousands survive, cherished, restored, worth real money. The Mini made it because people decided it mattered. That's the difference. These cars didn't disappear because they were bad. They disappeared because they were ordinary, and nobody thought ordinary was worth keeping. We saved the cars we admired. We scrapped the cars we actually loved. So, what was on your driveway? Was it a Cortina, a Marina, an Allegro, or something nobody's mentioned yet? And be honest, did yours ever actually start first time on a cold morning? Let me know in the comments.